Hello, my friends. This is Dr. Randy Will. Today we're going to be talking about culture and specifically how culture is affected by negotiations. So as we go through here, I'm going to start first showing you this picture. This is an old Indian moral adage. Adage means something that you know has been around a long time that has a hidden meaning behind it. And this picture is actually great because what it does, it shows an elephant and it shows blind men or people who are blindfolded who are looking at this elephant, and as they feel the elephant, they don't know what they're doing. They don't know what they're feeling. So you can see where the person who's feeling the trunk may think he's touching a boa constrictor. The person feeling the leg of the elephant, he's sensing that maybe he's feeling the trunk of a tree. The person who's feeling the tail in the back, he may be thinking that he's actually feeling a rope of some sorts. This is called the elephant and the blind man. Now the moral of this parable is that humans have a tendency to claim absolute truth based upon their limited and subjective experience as they ignore other people's limited subjective experiences, which may actually be equally as true. Now let's kind of break that down. What that's basically saying is that when you look at something, and let's say whatever, and of course this is the case of the blindfolded people, but let's say you look at something, you're going to look at it and you're going to assume basic absolute truth based upon your previous experiences, even though it may not be right. It may be wrong according to what it actually is in life. So today we're going to be talking about culture. And culture, what is the definition of culture? It's a set of values, symbols, beliefs, languages that guide behavior of the people within a culture. So a good way to look is culture is the personality of the group or of the organization. Because even though we're going to be talking about personality culture today, also you have what's called organizational culture. Culture is comprised of assumptions, values, norms, and tangible signs. Those norms and tangible signs are what we call artifacts in there. A good way is this diagram here of the iceberg. So what you see on top, above the water line, those may be practices, behavior, what people are doing, maybe the language they're using, the way they're dressing. In a corporate culture, it may be what you see, the use of a time clock or the way the building's built or the way the people dress. For example, you go to a bank, they may be wearing suits and ties compared to if you go to Google, they may be wearing jeans and casual shirts. But what culture also does is what's below the waterline. So you can see here the beliefs, the values, the needs, the fears, the feelings, the thoughts, and the assumptions. So these are things you don't always see, but actually may be behind the curtain, as we call it. Particularly when you're looking at an organizational culture. It may look great on the front, but behind the scenes, it can actually be a problem in there. So when we talk about culture, we talk about the personality of a group of people or of an organization. You got your artifacts, your values, and your basic assumptions, and those three come together and you see that little element right in the center. That's what we consider the culture. So let's first talk about these artifacts. What are artifacts? Artifacts are things that you actually can see. So if you're talking about corporate culture, you may, like I say, look at the way people are dressing, you may look at the way the building's built, you may see desks, or you may be seeing shared desks instead of individual desks in offices. But what about a ethnic culture? Well, you know, ethnic cultures are very similar to corporate cultures. And what I'm showing you here is certainly not ethnic culture. This is the campus culture of the University of Texas here at Austin. So once again, you know, you can look at an ethnic culture and see the way people dress, maybe the way they speak. Different language, of course, maybe the way they eat or the type of foods they eat. But let's talk now, this is kind of being general about talking things that you maybe see in terms of what I call the campus culture. You can take a look here and you can see all these University of Texas buildings, and they're all built, they look very similar. The ones in the top left and the top right and in the bottom left, those were all built in the 1930s, but you can see how they built those with orange brick and that red ceiling, or I'm sorry, the red roof. The one in the bottom right, that is a building that was built about 10 years ago, but it was built to represent and to look like the other buildings. So this is very common in academic cultures, where you want all your buildings to look academic with it. Now, recently, as the University of Texas has been building more buildings, they're allowing the different departments and colleges to kind of define their own architecture. And you can take a look here at this. Now, the top left, you may look at that and say, you know, that could be engineering, but it's not. That's actually liberal arts. The one to the right of it is actually an engineering building, and the one to the very bottom left, that is the Dell Medical Center. Now, one of the things I want to point out, look at that Dell Medical Center. You know, it looks state-of-the-art, high technology. Go back here and look at the one bottom left here. It's called Sutton Hall. That is, I believe that's either architecture or government. I'm not positive on that. But in any case, it's a liberal arts in there. Now, aren't you glad that your School of Medicine doesn't look like that? Because you think, boy, they're still kind of caught back in the 1930s, 1940s compared to here's a case where the building looks new and the technology is cutting edge. So cultures, the artifacts can tell you a lot just by looking and just by trying to read what you're seeing. Then you've got what we call the values. Sometimes we call these your spouse values, but these are the core values of how the company or the culture, the ethnic culture has developed. Let's take, for example, a company culture. You know, they can be based upon teamwork and respect, honesty, you know, openness. You can see all the different things. It kind of repeats the same words all throughout here. But typically this comes about from the founder of the organization. Also, if you're talking about ethnic culture, it comes from the founders of the ethnic or the ethnic organization or the ethnic culture. And you said, now how does that work? Well, you can go back, take like the UK, for example. A lot of the things they do has been the same. It goes all the way back to the early kings and queens, going back to 1066. And a lot of these things have not necessarily changed, even though we have improved a lot and changed a lot of things, but a lot of the way people act, you know, and I always think it's kind of interesting how in the UK, you know, they're drinking tea. Over in the US, we have a tendency to drink coffee. And something that's interesting about Europe is that you can actually divide Europe right across north and south. And people in the north typically are, when they drink a alcoholic drink, they're drinking beer. That would be like Germany, and that would be like England, the Scandinavian countries. But you get in the south, they're drinking wines. France, Spain, Greece. And one of them is a little bit more Mediterranean, I think, because the grapes grow there. Or up the north, you know, you don't have the grapes growing. Not to say that it's exclusive, but that's just something that's kind of interesting. And see, once again, that can help to define culture. Now, one of the things I want to point out to you, don't overread these artifacts. Don't overread these values either. Don't sit there and say, well, because a culture drinks beer, they must be Northern European. No, that's not true. We see a lot of blending in it, and we see things change over time. So never think that culture doesn't change. It does have a tendency to change. And the things that change are what we call basic assumptions. And the word basic assumption basically means, to me, basics here, is how we do things around here. You know, for example, the nature of space, nature of time, you know, a space. Say, for example, you may go into a corporate environment and there you have desks, you have offices, that doors are shut. The more you're, the higher up in the organization, the more you have maybe a corner office with windows. You're low in the organization, you may be in a cubicle. That would be a nature of space in it. The nature of time. Now, this is interesting. We see this probably more so in ethnic cultures because you have what is called polychronic and monochronic time. Monochronic is very sequential, which means that everything goes on a straight line. You start at 8 in the morning to go to job and you end at 5 o'clock. You maybe have from 12 to 1 for lunch. Polychronic is circular time, which means you just do whatever needs to be done to get things done. And most of the world actually works on polychronic, which means that, you know, if they need to stay late to get the job done, they'll get it done. We're seeing that certain cultures are moving more toward polychronic and other cultures are moving more toward monochronic, but that's what we call nature of time. Now, when you're talking about basic assumption and negotiations, then it's a little different because when we're talking about this, you can see once again we have our monochronic time and polychronic. In negotiations, someone may think that we got to take step by step by step and I'm going to give us 4 hours to get the negotiation complete. In polychronic, it's kind of like we will negotiate all over the board about different things and we will just keep going until we decide we get finished. And it may take us, you know, 12, 18 hours, or we may get finished in 1 hour. Individualism, groupism, of course you know what that is. Individual means that maybe just one person negotiates with another person. But certain groups now, certain ethnic groups are very groupism or collective oriented, which means that they're going to send a team of negotiators, where another culture very individualistic, may just see in one person. And we'll talk about achievement description later. All these things are what we call the Schein model of culture. Now, Edgar Schein lived back, I mean, he recently passed away, but very, very popular back in the 1980s and 90s, early 2000s. He was a management professor, and he was known for creating a lot of the concepts about how we understand cultures, with the whole thing about artifacts, values, and basic assumption. But I will take us down the path now of talking about Hofstede, Gertz Hofstede. Now, Gertz Hofstede was a psychologist. He was an IBM employee. He was a professor of organizational anthropology, International Management University in Netherlands. And the thing that he did is that Gertz Hofstede went to work for IBM, and this goes back to the 1970s, 1980s. Now, what happened is IBM back then, Big Blue as we called it, and we still call it Big Blue, had offices all over the world. And they had it in New York, London, they had it in Dallas, they had them in Los Angeles and Paris, had them in Madrid, Rome, they had them in New Delhi, they had them in Tokyo, they had them in Saudi Arabia, they had them everywhere, Berlin, all over the place. And the problem was not all these offices were working as good as other ones were working. And the IBM executives could not figure this out. Why is the office in Toronto, in the office in New York, in the office in London working so well? Even the office in New Delhi is, but the one in France that was in Paris, or Madrid, or the one, let's say, that was in Tokyo, was not working as well. Well, was it the people? And this is the first thing that went through their mind, is that it was the people, that we hired the wrong employees. And they started thinking, well, no, maybe we had the wrong manager there. So they would shift managers around. They would send over maybe another one of their good managers from the LA office over to Tokyo, thinking that, you know, they have a little bit more of a West Coast attitude. But that didn't work either. So it wasn't the manager, it wasn't the people. Well, so they hired Gertz Hofstede to go around, and like I said, you know, the guy is a social psychologist. He passed away a few years ago, but his son continues the Hofstede cultural scale, and he went to each one of these locations that IBM had. I think they had something like 40 or 50 of them. He went to each one of them. He interviewed 100 or 200 employees. And he did this over a period of many years. He came back and he said, you know what, I can divide the operations into 5 different categories. And those categories tell us what type of culture that is and why it works or why it doesn't work with other cultures. So this makes a lot of sense. So these were called power distance, individualism, masculinity, femininity, which, by the way, probably doesn't mean what you think it does, uncertainty, avoidance, and long-term orientation. So what is power distance? Power distance says that not all individuals in society are created equal. So power distance is the extent to which the less powerful members of an institution or organization within the country accept and they expect that power is unequal. So what that basically means is that some people they may get something that someone else doesn't get. Now, the way that Hofstede understood this is ascription and achievement. Achievement means that anything you want to work toward, you can actually earn, you could get to it. That's achievement. Ascription means that you've got to be born into the class or the caste system. So for example, if you were, let's say you're in Saudi Arabia, you come out of a very wealthy family, you probably had the ability to step in a very nice job to get a very, very good education. But if you came out of the poor class in Saudi Arabia, you probably could not get the education, nor could you go to work at a very, let's say, Ernst & Young or maybe Deloitte and work up to be a VP. So this is the first thing that Hofstede found out, is that we have power distance. Certain countries, you've got to be born into it to move up. Other countries, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter what you're born into, you're able to build it up. Now, I would sit there and say for the US, we have what we call a low power distance. Now, it doesn't mean we have a zero power distance, because still, if you're born with a certain amount of wealth and particularly maybe certain areas of larger cities or whatever, you have the ability to maybe have a better education, to maybe have better resources to get a job. But Still, there are success stories of people who came out of very, very poor neighborhoods in rural areas, have very, very poor education, but they were able to move up and they were able to get up in corporations to a very high level. The next one was individualism compared to collectivism. Now, what does that mean? You probably already know. Some societies are very individualistic. Other ones, people work together. So the individualistic society, people are supposed to look for themselves. Where the collective society, you are looking at the group, and there's a lot of what is called the exchange for loyalty there. So in the US, we're fairly individualistic, but that's not the case in a lot of cultures. When you look at a lot of the Asian cultures, they are known to be very collective, which is a very interesting and actually a very good way to operate because you're working as a team. And we've adopted that over here in the US. That's why in schools now we have a lot of team exercises for people to do. But then at the same time, the other parts of the world that are very collective, they're starting to adopt some of the individualistic ways too. The next one is masculinity, femininity. And the way you have to understand this is a high score in this means that you're very competitive. You're very achievement oriented. You're very competitive. A low score in this category means you're a feminine society, which means you're very caring for others and you're very concerned about the quality of life. Now, you may sit there and say, I'm competitive, but I do care about life. Well, yeah, I understand. It kind of could be a blend in there. But the most part, you got to look at it as competitive or caring. Certain cultures are more competitive. Other cultures are very caring about people. And then you have certainty and avoidance. This is whether or not you're going to take risk. It's also known as risk avoidant or risk management. To the extent which the members feel that they're threatened by the unknown situation, they have to create beliefs institutions that try to avoid these different type of risk. Now, basically, some organizations do not want to take risk. So in corporate cultures, you can see this playing out where certain organizations take risk all the time. I've seen it with airlines where all of a sudden they decide, we're going to go out there and we're going to go to all these different cities because we think people may want to fly there for vacations and we're going to forget about the business travelers. And then someone else goes there and said, we're going to forget about the vacation in the rural cities. We're going to go purely for the business travel. So, this is a case where they both are taking risks. But then I've seen other airlines that won't even take a risk at all. Certain ethnic cultures will take risks and others will not. The last one that Gert Hofstede had was long-term orientation. And this basically says that do they look far into the future? Are they long-term oriented or are they a short-term oriented? Do they have a short-term point of view? Now, I always like to sit there and say, what do you think the U.S. is? Well, it's interesting because the U.S. is very short-term. That's one of the reasons why when the stock market goes up and down, the people in the U.S. have a tendency to sell or buy or sell or buy. When you look how long our president is in office, he only can serve for 2 terms for 8 years total. But take a look at someplace like China or someplace that is very old like Egypt. These things are like 10, 15,000 years old compared to the U.S., which is not even 250 years old yet. And so here you see China and Egypt are 2 very long-term oriented. The U.S., we talk about 6 months, 1, 3, 5 years. In China, they're talking about 10, 50, 100, 200, 500 years down the future. How can we even speculate what's going to happen in 5 years? But a long-term oriented culture looks that way because it's been around for a long period of time. So Gert Hofstede has these 5 different things and he rates them on 1 to 100, with 100 being the highest. So if you have a 100 on power distance, that means you purely have a power distance culture, which means that you're either born into it or you're not. If you have a 100 on individualism, that means you're totally individualistic, that there is basically no teamwork involved. You see how it goes down on that. Now, after Hofstede looked at all of these different ethnic cultures, or at the 60 or 70 different IBM locations, he put them on a grid. Now, I know this grid is a little bit small, kind of hard to see, but I want to show you that on the X grid, you see it says individualism. On the Y, it says power distance. A large power distance means you're born into it. A low power distance means it's achievement oriented. Anybody can move up in the world. Now, the higher, you can take a look there at the individualism. The individualism is you see, it's low at the top, high at the bottom. They're kind of alternating this here. But if you have a very individualistic society with a 95, that means you're very, very individualistic. But if you go up to the very top, it's like a 5, which means you're very collective. Now, so take a look at some of these countries here. So look at that bottom left quadrant. Look who's over there. Well, down there, you see the very bottom, we got the United States. Our power distance is running about a 40, which means that, we don't believe, for the most part, that you have to be born into a role of power. Now, it's not a 0, so remember, if you sit there saying that's not exactly right, because some people have no way getting into it, that's right, you're exactly right. That would be a 0, but we're a 40, so that means that you can be born into it or you may not be born into it. But look at the opposite. Look over there at the far right, and you see almost to, I'm not sure they get 110, but you see Slovakia, you're born into it or you're not born into it. Oh boy, I tell you, that's a pure power distance. Then to look at individualism. Well, the U.S., we're down there around, oh gosh, what is that? We're about a 90 on the, or maybe a 92 on the individualistic. So we're very, very individualistic. But look at the top the top right quadrant. Look at Guatemala, very collective and very power distance. Who else is over there? Serbia, Romania. I've taught many years in Romania. I have a hard time understanding them because they're so different than we are. You're either born into it or you're not. They really believe that, that unless you have a certain amount of power in your family, you'll never get out of Romania. And they're very collective too about doing things there. And then, take a look, who else is up there? Slovenia, Hong Kong, Singapore, Vietnam, China. It's very interesting, Turkey. But flip over here to the left side, Costa Rica, Trinidad, they're collective, but they're also low power distance. Now, what that tells you is that if you're concerned about if your operation is going to be collective or individualistic, if you're concerned about do your people think that they have the ability to move up in the company or are they going to be stuck in the company? So if you take an American manager like IBM did and send them over to, let's say, send them to Brazil, they're not going to be very successful because you can see Brazil is over there in that top right quadrant near the bottom. So what would you want to do? Well, if you've got someone who's in Greece, who's a manager in Greece, or someone who's a manager in Serbia, you want to send them to Brazil. And this is what Hofstede was trying to tell us, is that if you look at these things, so where are you going to send these American managers? Well, you can see Australia, Great Britain, Canada, New Zealand, Denmark, Sweden, Norway. It's pretty much North America and also Northern Europe. This is why IBM was struggling these different companies. Now, here's another one. This one here is the uncertainty avoidance. And then the other one is masculinity. So masculinity means you're very, very competitive. Now, and then if you go up the scale, if you go up to the top, you are weak uncertainty avoidance, which means you'll take risk. You will take risk. If you go down to the bottom, it means you're strong in avoidance. That means you don't take risk. Now, once again, where is the U.S.? Well, we're in that top right quadrant, below the Philippines. We're not as high as Great Britain, but that's where we are. But now look who is just the opposite. Okay, there's my friends Romania again, the bottom left. There's Slovenia, Costa Rica, Chile, Bulgaria, Guatemala, Belgium, Portugal. Now things are kind of changing a little bit here. Luxembourg. And so once again, oh, by the way, look over here who does not like to take risk, but they're masculine. Japan. So once again, this is very interesting. So Hofstede did this on all 5 of these. He matched them all together. And this is what even today the companies will look at and decide where we're going to send managers abroad or where we're going to bring employees abroad to the U.S. So Once again, if you are a company and you're looking at trying to start an operation in Poland, and you're concerned about employees, that you are concerned that they're not going to want to take risks. You're concerned that you know that they're more caring or less competitive, whatever. You may want to send someone from your company, from your operation in Japan over to Poland, because actually they're closer than sending someone from Denmark. See, Denmark's the top left, down over to Poland. If you're concerned about the risk and concerned about masculine or feminine, which is the caring. So this is the way the Hofstede cultural chart works. And once again, I'm not going to show you all these, but this is just a good example of how you can see how it actually does work. Now, once again, here they are. And these are those 5 different ones: power, distance, individualism, and therefore. Now, where's the U.S.? This is a bar graph, and this is a little easier to see. So you can see the power distance, we're 40, which means that we think that, you know, you can achieve things you don't have to be born into. But we're very big in terms of being individualistic. Now, in terms of caring or being competitive, we are 62, which means we're more masculine, we're more competitive, but we're not way up there. And look at that certainty avoidance. Okay, because it's low, that means we do take risk, but we're not down there at a 10, which means that we're taking major risks. We're taking risks, but not all the risk. And then once again, that long-term orientation, we're very low on that. Now, I told you I taught in Romania, and Romania is, as you can see on this map here, Romania is the big green one right in the very center, below the Ukraine, above Bulgaria. Romania is an interesting place. This is Brasov. This looks like a typical, just nice little Romanian town with the town hall and the church right in the center, and all the little businesses around the town square. That's what, very, very nice. But this is where I taught. I taught in western Romania. This is Oradea, near the Hungarian border. And where the previous one was very storybook, this is very, oh gosh, how do I put it? It looks like a Soviet bunker, doesn't it? I mean, the Soviets went in there and they were not concerned about aesthetics. They were concerned about functionality. So this is an apartment complex, and you can see it was built with concrete. It's not particularly that great. If you did have had a house in this part of Romania, the western part, not the eastern. Eastern part is where Bucharest, the capital, is, and a lot of the older part. But in the western part, this is kind of what your house may look like. So I taught this university called Universitat Emanuel din Oradea. Din means in Oradea. Oradea is a city. This is one of the buildings. And the bottom 2 floors are always classrooms, and everything above that. You may have a 3rd floor, maybe offices, and the 4th and 5th floor is going to be residences where the students would live in there. And this is an example of some of the Romanian students. These are not my students, but I do want to point out to you, if you look hard, you're going to see something's missing. Women. I mean, basically, they're on the 2nd row over there to the left side. And so Romania has a tendency to be kind of still stuck in the 1960s in many ways. And because of that, Romania is not a high achievement, it's more of a description, because women still, unfortunately, they don't get the education. And it's not because they cannot get it, but just the people in general feel like you send the boy to the education, ladies will be more of household, or they may be taking jobs that do not require a college education. However, it is changing. That's very exciting, because this is my class when I was teaching. You can see, once again, there's a lot of girls in this class, and these were all undergraduate BBA business students, and you can see that, you know, I have a good mix of boys and girls in there. Now, I showed you that because I told you I taught there for several years. I still go back. This is the U.S., but now take a look at Romania. Romania, a very high power distance. Okay, that means that, you know, you're either born into it, you're born into where you have the ability to the family to go get the education, to go get good jobs, to maybe move out, to go to Germany, to go to Great Britain, to come to the United States, or maybe you're not. So, description versus achievement. Now, they're very collective. And it was very interesting is that in Romania, when I was giving my first exam, I looked up and everybody's gathered in little groups taking the exam. I'm kind of, guys, girls, what's going on here? And they said, we're taking the exam. I said, no, you're not. Looks like you all are collaborating. They said, yeah, it's that's how we take exams. I said, no, you take it by yourself. And they had this deer in the headlight look on them. Like, wait, we take it ourselves? We typically do things together. That's because this is a very, very collective society, and they do a lot of things together. Well, okay. So they're in groups of 6 or 7, and the dean of business came by a little bit later and said, "How did your first exam go?" And I said, they were making 20s and 30s. They really did poorly. He said, did you tell them that it was individualistic? And I said, no. He said, well, that's problem number 1. And he said, and how many people were in a group? And he said, he goes, before you tell me, let me ask you, how many chapters were the exam over? And I said, 6 chapters. He said, I bet there were 6 or 7 people in the group. I said, you're right. How did you know that? He said, because they each divided up. One person studied chapter 1, one person studied chapter 2, and therefore. So when they got together, the person who studied chapter 1 knew all the answers for chapter 1. And when they got to chapter 2, they all knew, and that's how they shared it. And he said, and you probably stopped them before they got past chapter 1. And he said, and they were just probably all sitting there thinking, oh my gosh, all I know is the one chapter I studied. I studied chapter 5, I know it's chapter 5. That's probably why they got 20s on the exam in there. Now, Romania is a caring society, and the reason why is because it was former a Soviet country. In Soviet countries, you pretty much took care of each other. So they didn't have all the products like we maybe have in the West. They didn't have, all the bread and the meat and the appliances and things like that. So if you have meat and someone else didn't have meat, you maybe would swap your bread and vegetables for meat. But it was very caring. You would take care of people. And then also the Romanians do not take risk. And I thought this was funny. The dean of the School of Business, he told me, he said, we're not risk takers. And I said, why is that? He said, well, we just kind of choose the wrong thing. And he said, we've always kind of chosen the wrong people to side with. So he said, basically, whatever we tell you to do, he said, do something else. He said, we chose we chose the Germans back during the war. And then he said, we chose the Russians. And he said, the Russians never left. He said, we just kind of choose sometimes the people who are not winning the war on that. And he said, that's just kind of the way we are. Now, when you put Romania next to the United States, you can see how almost opposite it is. The power distance is opposite. Individualist, collective are opposite. Caring or competitive. Look at the who takes risks and who doesn't. So you can see why when I was teaching Romania, I was really having a hard time because I am just basically the opposite of they are. Now take a look here. This is Hungary. Hungary is right next to Romania. And the thing that's interesting about Hungary is that being right next to Romania, you think they'll be similar to Romania. But look when you put Hungary up against Romania in the U.S. You can see Hungary mimics, almost is identical to the U.S. Power distance, individualism. Look at this. They're even more competitive than we are. But they are still an avoidant society. Partly is because that, they are, they're scared of taking risk. So it's one of these things that, they used to take more risk, but they don't hardly take any risk at all, just like in Romania. And they're also not very long-term oriented. Now we'll throw in the United Kingdom. And let's take a look, see what they look like. So United Kingdom, almost identical to the U.S., 40-30. Individualism 91-89, competitive masculinity 62-66. Here they are, uncertainty avoidance. They actually take more risk than we do, 35-46. Now I'm going to throw Russia into it. Now this is fascinating because look where Russia is. Russia, you're either born into it or you're not. Now that makes sense. Because for over 1,000 years, you were either born into the Tsarist group, you're part of the royal family, and then when it shifted over to Lenin and the Soviet era, you're either part of the party, Communist Party, or you were not in that. They're very collective. Now look down here. They're very feminine. Now what was interesting is Hungary was very competitive, and I'm going to explain in a few minutes why that happened. But you can see where Russia is very feminine, very caring, like Romania. And next thing, Russia does not take chances. Now, folks, is that the Russia we know of? They're down there. They attacked the Crimea. They're attacking Ukraine. Now, one thing is I want to point out to you: the people and the leaders are not always the same. So when you look at this and you look at Russia, the Russian people are very caring. They're very caring, but that doesn't mean that the leadership of Vladimir Putin, he may not be, matter of fact, he takes risk, okay? He actually goes out there and he would take a risk. And so where that uncertainty avoidance, where the Russian people do not take a risk, he would take a risk. But I can guarantee you, he's always very concerned about keeping the support of the people. He may take a risk, but if it starts falling apart someplace, he'll start backing off because he's scared the Russian people will start pushing him to not take a risk. And you can see down there where the people are caring, but once again, this is on the people, this is not on the leadership. So if we did the leadership, you probably would see the leadership would go in there and they would be very individualistic, not collective. They'll be very competitive, not feminine, and they'll be high risk takers. Now, remember I told you that was interesting about Romania and Hungary being next to each other, but Hungary is so similar to the U.S. Well, let's talk for a second that where did Romania, who settled or colonized Romania? Now, Romania is around going back for centuries. But it was the Romans who literally came in and did a lot of the colonization of Romania. And this started happening way back in the 400s and went forward with that. So if I was to put Italy up here next to Romania, you'll see is identical, just like you're seeing the US and the UK really, really close, because obviously we have a lot of the characteristics in the United States that they do in the UK. You know, there are the people who originally came over here. They came over from England. The Pilgrims did. Now, what does that tell you about Hungary? They're right next to them. But who actually colonized, settled Hungary? Well, what's interesting about this is the Visigoths. The Visigoths were a tribe, a Germanic tribe up in Germany, and they came down from the north through Hungary. They also came Austria and all this, going down to Rome to sack Rome in 400 AD. And along the way, they left people to set up little communities there. And a lot of Romanian towns were started and communities were started by the Visigoths that were Germans. So if I was to put Germany up here next to Hungary, you would see that they're going to be almost identical. So now, do you see a pattern here? Remember what I said? The Italians, the Romans, maybe the Spaniards, the Romanians, very, very similar. But Hungarians, even though they're in Eastern Europe, are very close to the way Germans are. And the UK and the US are very similar. And you're going to see in a few minutes where the US and Germany are very similar too. And we'll talk about that when we get to it. By the way, this is China. This is kind of interesting because when you look at China, you can see that China is another interesting character. I shouldn't say character, country. But you can see that once again, you're born into it, you're not born into it. You can see they're very collective. But what's interesting here, China is very competitive. They're more competitive than the U.S. is. And they will take risk. So now we're not seeing things matching as well. We're not seeing them matching that closely to the Romania's, Spain, France, or whatever. And we're not seeing them match very closely to the U.S. either. We match and we unmatch. So it's kind of interesting. But you see also, they're very long-term oriented. Now, let's talk about Germany for a second. Germany is interesting. And this is Germany. So their power distance is low, which means you don't have to be born into it. You can actually achieve things. They're very highly individualistic, not as high as the U.S., and they're also, they are very masculine, which means they're very competitive. Remember, the U.S. is like 60, they're 66, and they do take risk. Germany does take risk, and they're also long-term oriented. And this is a new listing from Hofstede, because now he adds another one called indulgence. Indulgence means how open they are to go out there and spend money to buy things that maybe is not necessary. So 40, which means Germans are fairly cautious with some of their spending. Now, they're not down there at 10. They're not being super cautious, but they're not 90 up there just buying whatever, buying the most expensive cars, the most expensive houses, the most expensive clothing. Now, we'll put up there the U.S. Now, Germany is still orange and the U.S. is 40. But you can see now, this is more updated than it was a second ago. So you can see here that Germany actually has more of achievement than the U.S. does. Germany is more individualistic than the U.S. We're becoming more collective. We're fairly similar there in terms of the competitiveness. Germany actually will take more chances than we will in the U.S. Long-term orientation about the same, but look where the U.S. is in indulgence. We do, I hate to say we waste money, but yes, we do. We may go out there, hey, it's okay to spend $150 on a shirt. Oh, it's okay to spend $200 on a pair of jeans. That would be the indulgence. Once again, we're only 68. Thank goodness we're not 90. I'm going to go ahead and show you something else here. This is France. Now, colors kind of got shifted here. So France is first, Germany second, U.S. is third. And you can kind of see that, it's kind of a little bit all over the board here, but a couple things I want to show you. France is, they do not want to take risk, okay? I said that wrong a second ago. The U.S. takes more risk than Germany's. France takes even less risk. They're not risk takers at all. The long-term orientation about the same. One of the reasons why is that way is because Germany and France, even though the country has been around going back to, 300 AD, the French Revolution happened in the late 1700s. Germany started to come together as a unified country in, I believe, the 1700s in there. But it's just kind of interesting. You see that France and Germany are not that similar, but because they're close together, they're more similar than if I was to go up there and put Spain up there. Now, let's look at the overall globe, and this is kind of interesting because now I'm going to throw all this to you a different way here. Here's the power distance. So you can see that the lighter the color, the more achievement, the darker the color, the more you're born into it. So you can take a look, you can see Russia, lots of North Africa, a fair amount of South America. You're either born into it or you're not into it. Europe, pretty much Northern Europe and North America, those are areas that you are going to, literally, you're going to be achievement oriented. Collective individualistic is dark purple. Collective is going to be the lighter shades. So you take a look at that. And here is that masculinity, femininity. The more masculine you are, the darker you are, which the more feminine you are is going to be the lighter you are on that. So you can see here the caring compared to the more, competitive. And look how China is. Look even in Mexico. Both of those are very, very, and I just told you the opposite on there. I am so sorry. The darker color is the caring groups. The lighter ones are going to be the competitive ones. So you can see where the Scandinavians are more competitive, and as they get darker, they get more caring. And then those who take risk, those are the ones who are light. The people who do not take risk are dark. And here, you look at South America, and that tells you quite obviously they do not believe in taking a risk. Now, culture negotiation. How does this all affect you in negotiation? Well, there's some people. Trumpeter, Hampton Turner, and Williams, they all study culture just like Hofstede did, but they also came up with some ideas about negotiation. And they included these other things in there. And the ones I just kind of want to point out is, universalism, particularism, What is important? Do you go by rules or do you go by relationships? Certain cultures are more concerned about following rules. Other ones are more concerned about the relationship. Relationship referring to is that, well, it's okay to break a rule because I'm helping somebody else. Some are more emotional than others. Okay, that makes sense. Certain cultures are just more emotional, other ones are not. And then, of course, do you do everything at one time or do you do several things at once? So all that has a lot to do with it. And then they also looked at these different things about, the attitude. Certain cultures look at negotiation as a win-lose, where other ones look at it has to be a win-win. Some look at it be very informal, some believe it's very, very formal. So you can kind of look down here. Of course, risk-taking, some are very high risk takers, some are low risk takers. I like the one here about team organization. Certain cultures, one person goes, another one, you would have a consensus. Remember, individualism, collectivism. Now let's talk about this real quickly. I'm going to go through these fairly quickly with you. But here's what you can see here. You can see the negotiation patterns of different countries, the U.S. We start off and put all the cards on the table. Basically, we're talking about what we want. We spell it out. We may get a little louder, not too much. We do some sarcasm, do some kidding around. We kind of provoke people sometimes. We may get a little disagreement, a little bit of fight, but then we're going to have concessions. See how it kind of broadens? That means that it's getting a little bit more hostile, but not out of control. Just a little bit more vocal, but then we start coming down with concession summaries, and then we have clarity, and we have a decision. We have a conclusion off of it. That's how we do in the U.S. Now, Canada's a little bit different. They start off much like the U.S., honest, open, cards on the table, looking at options, the pros and cons. They look very closely at the other people's views. They look for the win-win, immediate action, and then they act upon it. So it's very logical. So a Canadian, not so much in terms of you're seeing any type of emotions all involved. Now, why does the U.S. have more emotions? Because we have so many cultures here. Yes, we came out of Europe, but we have a very large Hispanic culture. We have African American culture. We have the Asian culture. So we have all these other cultures. That explains how we do some of our negotiation. Now, the UK is interesting. 5-10 minutes small talk. They casually introduce business and they present a reasonable proposal. They're very calm. They have coded speech. Now, coded speech, and they have understatements. Coded speech is interesting. Coded speech means that basically that they're saying something that actually means something to the other person, and they understand what it is. So if they say something like, let's use an example. If you want milk in your tea, they're going to say, how many spots? You're going to say, how many spots? Well, a spot of milk means a drip of milk. If they say how many lumps, you say, I want sugar, this is how many lumps, that makes sense. We kind of know what that means. But these are coded speeches. In negotiation, they may say something like, this is working, but not working as good as I want it to work. Okay, that pretty much means you're not getting anywhere with them. It's stopping at this point. It may sound polite, but they're actually telling you very bluntly. So that's coded speech. Understatements, same things. They will stall sometimes. Just like, I need to think more about this. I need to consider this. They do a lot of repackaging, unbundling, rebundling. They like summarize a point. You think you're coming down to a decision, and then they come out with this, okay, let me think about it, and then we'll meet again and I'll make the decision. So here we go again. So you can see how you grow up and then you start growing down. You think there's a decision, but there's not. People in the UK, I've negotiated with Brits many times, they always want to think about it a little bit more, and that may not be the next meeting tomorrow. It may mean the next meeting is going to be in 30 minutes, or it may mean a week from now. Germany, very straightforward. They know the past. They do a lot of research. They really understand what's going on. They remember previous negotiations with you. They come very prepared to the table. They give you a statement context. This is what we're looking for, and then they're going to examine your facts very carefully, and they'll make a frank proposal with it. If there's counter arguments, they listen to it, they absorb it. They may offer a counter proposal or they may not. Sometimes they are very big about walking away. It's kind of like, this is just not working right now. We'll just have to get together another time. But they will be very cautious, but they're very firm in their agreement too. And it says here, the truth is the truth, which means that if the Germans say this is what we agree to, they're not going to change it. They are going to stick with that, and they're going to stay with that the whole time. So they are very, very logical about it. They're very matter of fact. There's no joking around. There's no, okay, well, the emotions playing. None of that happens. Very good to negotiate with. You know exactly where you are. Compared to Spain. Now, remember, I told you, when you're looking at the Hofstede cultural scale, I didn't show you Spain, but Spain, Romania, very similar. Italy, nothing at all like you find maybe in Germany or the UK. It starts a very emotional, romantic. I'm not going to say they're going to come over and give you a kiss, but they want to develop a relationship. There's a lot of talking. There's eloquence in there. And you may see an increase in the emotion if they are not liking, or you may see increased emotions if they do like what you're saying. They like your proposal. That's wonderful. I love this. I mean, and you start hearing this. And when everything's all being said and it's being thrown out there, and they sense that loyalty, a decision is made, but you see what it says here is that, it's not coming back down. It's still flaring up there, and emotions and everything's going, and a decision's made. And sometimes you walk away from a Spanish negotiation wondering, did we agree on this or not? Because it doesn't seem to ever have a really closed conclusion to the negotiation. Norway, I'm not going to go through a lot of this with you, but you can see here that they're very similar to the Germans in terms of being very logical. You see, they do get a little bit more looking at the whole picture, but they get very entrenched in that position, and they have clarity in then what they say they're going to do. Netherlands, very similar to that. The Dutch, they examine the facts very closely. They like to kind of see if you're bluffing. They're kind of trying to determine, are you being legit and honest about it? And then they'll have a long debate. And this is one of the things I found negotiating with the Dutch, is that it's not a quick. It is going to be a long negotiation, because each item they're going to debate, they're going to discuss it a lot and bring up different. They're going to look at every proposal in the world, and then there's no haggling and there's no rush, and you start seeing coming right down to, we got the conclusion, we have decided, and you think you've got it, and they say, and we'll let you know tomorrow. So here you've got the case where, just like the British, you think you've got it, and then we're going to decide tomorrow, or we're going to decide later today, I've got to talk to someone else. Hungary, a little bit more emotional. I'm not going to go through all this with you, but one thing it says, you see right there, is that everybody talks at once. That's very common in Hungary. You don't think there's any pattern to what's going on. You don't think there is a decision being made, and all of a sudden there's an agreement. And this is what we're going to do. You're kind of like, whoa, where did that come from? And that's the way the Hungarians will negotiate. You can see how the emotions come up and all this talking, and then it shoots down very quickly. India, very similar to the British. And why is that? Because basically the British colonized India. A lot of the things in India, the way the laws work, they replicate the British. So you can see how this works. You can see there's some modifications midway through. There's some repackaging, and then the agreement is reached. And this gets a little different as you go further down into Southeast Asia and Indonesia. You can see that's changing a little bit here. The whole thing's getting a little wider in there. There's a lot of politeness in here. They're asking a lot of questions. Is this what you are wanting? Am I understanding you correctly? They're trying to clarify things, and then it ends. But it ends with ambiguity, which means that once again, when it ends, you're maybe not sure what you came out with, because once again, it didn't close down and come to the point. It's kind of stayed broad, which means that you're going to do a lot of clarification. It's let me make sure I understand. That's why with people in Southeast Asia, quite often you have to really write things down and make sure that you fully understand. Singapore, interesting. I love this. Entertaining, banquets, golf, karaoke. Okay, maybe not all the time. Lots of questions. They offer their opinions and stuff. They're very shrewd negotiators. And then look at these tactics right in the middle here. Stalling, last minute demands, fake anger, hinting that you may fail. inflated the initial price, pretending that they do not care about the outcome. Now, once again, this is not 100% of the time, but this is what they say people in Singapore, you see about 50 to 70% of the time, it's just kind of like a dance, and they do all this stuff to make sure that, that everybody's on the same page, and they're just kind of testing the water on a lot of different things. And then you see all of a sudden it shrinks down to, they get down to earth agreement, there's a goal, and you've got it. So it's a fascinating way to negotiate. Very different from the UK, from Germany, from the US. Probably people in Spain, maybe that they would have a easier time with people in Southeast Asia. But then, of course, there's Israel. Israel is very interesting because very bold and direct. Boy, they started right off the bat with, this is what we want, very clear proposals. Very openly tenacious, which means that basically that they're going to say, I want to hear your thoughts, but these are my thoughts, and this is what we need to be working toward. They are not without humor, but they're kind of cynics about things, a little irony too about things. And then it says they have horse trading. Now, and if I was teaching a group of students in Israel, they will say, well, we call it haggling, which means, what are you going to do for this? If I give you this, I'm going to do this. It's kind of like, we call it kind of horse trading. That's not a bad term. Matter of fact, you can get a lot done with the haggling part in negotiations, because what you're doing is you're throwing everything on the table and you're trying to divide things up. And I've negotiated with people in Israel before, and actually, it's kind of an interesting way to negotiate because you're seeing everything at one time, and then you come to this very pragmatic, which means a very practical conclusion, which means everything comes down to where now this is what we decided, you're going to take it, and that's what I'm going to take, and then there's clarity in there. That is it for culture. You can see here, culture is, remember I told you artifacts, values, I told you basic assumptions. You can see here, the attitudes up there, the beliefs. Languages are the artifacts. Customs are artifacts. Those are basic assumptions. Rituals, behaviors, faith and religion, food, all these different things. All this adds to how they negotiate. And when you're negotiating internationally, you have to understand that culture. Never try to imitate their culture because that's almost an insult. But you need to understand that their culture is different than yours. And don't be offended by when they say something that you think is impolite or being rude. It just may be the way their culture negotiates. That's why I always tell people, before you go into a cultural negotiation with a different culture, read up on that culture. Go to the Geertz Hofstede and look and see, are they collective or they individualistic? Are they competitive or they're caring? Do they take a risk or they don't take a risk? And then start trying to do some research into not only defining your BATNA, but different cultural ways of that particular culture you're going to be negotiating with. Hope you enjoyed today's lecture. Look forward to talking to you again.